The Progressive Era was about doing what was right. It was about getting or attempting to at least decrease discrimination and inequality. It was about getting rid of this idea of one person holding unfair power over another. People were optimistic about society in the future, and they thought there was room for growth and improvement, and believed government was the key. It was an era that was guided by strong morals and a good conscience. The women's suffrage movement was a huge part of the Progressive Era. Alice Paul, Margaret Sanger, Jane Addams, along with many other women, wanted to end this prejudice against women once and for all. Alice Paul, shown here, was a major leader in the women's suffrage movement. She was the leader of the National Women's Party and led the women's suffrage parade right before President Wilson's inauguration. She and many other women who were by her side at the time wanted to move the president and the crowd surrounding them. They wanted to be seen, they wanted to be heard, and they wanted the president to feel this pressure of creating an amendment for women to vote. Because with this right to vote, women's voices could finally be heard. The reason this gained so much traction in the Progressive Era was because the US was reaching a point where it believed in making things right. Everyone knew in their hearts it was not right to keep women who were wives and sisters and moms suppressed just because they were women. They had brains like men, they were getting education like men, and were capable like men. They were using their education to fight for themselves and to show more than ever their voices matter, and their voices can bring a different perspective that could be beneficial to many issues. African American women, on the other hand, were on a different agenda, supporting anti-lynching movements. In this excerpt here, Mary Turner, an African American woman whose husband was lynched, tried to do her husband justice. It says, she threatened to have members of the mob arrested. The mob, therefore, started after her. She fled from her home and was found the next morning. She was in the 8th month of pregnancy, but the mob of several hundred took her to a small stream, tied her ankles together, and hung her on a tree head downwards. Gasoline was thrown on her, and she was set on fire. One of the members took a knife and split her abdomen open so that the unborn child fell from her womb. This just shows the brutality and unnecessary violence involved in these lynches. It was purely a matter of hatred and race and prejudice. It dehumanized the victims like Mrs. Turner. They treated her like she was an animal, even worse than an animal, and that's why the fight against lynching was so strong. Mary Talbert, in a letter to James Johnson, leader of the NAACP, says, "I really haven't the time or money to come down again so soon, but I am going to make the sacrifice and be there Monday, July 10th. I believe I can put this over 1 million. I can do it." Her determination is unmatched, and she was willing to make sacrifices in order to see that awareness was spread on this issue. She especially wanted to justify fellow African American women who were being lynched. This was an era where people were becoming more open-minded and more empathetic with African Americans. Seeing and hearing about these types of unjust brutalities to humans were sickening and consciously unsettling to even the most prejudiced Americans. It was wrong, and they knew it. Another major point in the Progressive Era was temperance. People started to see that excessive alcohol was destructive. In this picture, there is a family on their knees with what looks like a drunk husband and father unconscious on the bed. The mom and son are on the ground looking distressed and exhausted, and listening to what looks like a preacher or a minister of some sort reading the Bible to them. It is their only sense of hope. There were many different types of propaganda used to support the temperance movement. Pamphlets were given to adults and children. There were emotional and logical approaches that pointed to one's characters and morals. People would ask questions like, do you want to be able to think properly or be a better man? And the answer is yes, then you shouldn't drink. These questions appealed to their character. On a more religious note, many used the Christian doctrine and Bible as the foundation to fight alcohol. It really helped people who were conflicted between whether or not alcohol was worth it. If they knew society and their religion opposes temptation and knew that drinking would destroy family foundations and work ethic, then they could decide. It was a matter of what they consciously believed was right and wrong, not only for themselves, but for the ones they loved. Lastly, the war marked the Progressive Era. President Wilson, who ran as a progressive, needed to remain loyal to those who supported him. He wasn't about to turn his back on these people that got him into office. At the same time, he knew the US needed to fight this war, so what did he do? He turned the war into a matter of right and wrong. It was no longer about the money and the economic corruption that many feared wars were about. It was about spreading this beautiful democracy in the US to those around the world who didn't have it. He was trying to get people to understand that. In his 14-point speech, he said, there shall be no private international understandings of any kind, but diplomacy shall proceed always frankly and in the public view. He was developing a sense of openness between nations and the world to prevent future wars. But at the same time, this sense of openness showed the Americans that there were no secrets. Government was changing, and there was no more corruption. The public and government were one. On top of that, the 14 points were a wake-up call for the world to know that we are here and we will fight for freedom, not only in the US, but everywhere. President Wilson instilled the idea that if we were able to enjoy this beautiful freedom, so should everyone else. Here is a drawing depicting a man on a horse with a cape that says imperialism on it. As you can see, the gate marked with the 14-point sign leads to a world's peace, and it's preventing this man who stands for imperialism from getting through the gates. Americans were the good guys, and they were going to stand up and fight for what they believed in. Their morals were shining through and telling them to fight for this righteousness.